The receipt was folded in half, as if it had something to hide. It sat on the kitchen counter between my keys and the bowl of lemons I never'd eat. Morning light came in thin and pale, catching the glossy edge of the paper. I picked it up without thinking. The coffee machine clicked behind me. Normal sounds, ordinary air. My name was printed near the bottom, not handwritten, not mistaken, typed cleanly. I read it twice before I felt anything. The charge wasn't small, but it wasn't dramatic either. That almost made it worse. It looked reasonable, intentional, processed. I tried to remember approving it. A call, an email, a conversation in passing. Nothing came. My brother had been here 3 nights ago. He'd leaned against this same counter, telling me about a temporary arrangement. I remember nodding. I remember not asking enough questions. The receipt was dated the next morning. I set it back exactly where it had been, smoothed the fold with my thumb. The coffee finished brewing. I poured a cup and stood there, watching the surface settle. I didn't call him. Not yet. He called that afternoon as nothing had shifted. I let it ring twice before answering, not to punish him, just to feel the space. "Hey," he said, light, casual. Background noise. A door is closing somewhere on his end. I matched his tone, asked about his meeting, his dog, the traffic he always complains about. My voice stayed level, almost pleasant. I've had years of practice. There was a small pause before he mentioned it. "I took care of that thing for you," he said. "You don't have to worry about it anymore." That thing. I leaned against the counter, staring at the lemons. "Oh?" I said. "Yeah, it was easier if I just handled it. You trust me, right?" The question wasn't really a question. It had never been. Growing up, he'd answer for me at restaurants, speak first during parent-teacher conferences, explain my own feelings back to me like translations. I let the silence stretch just long enough to be noticeable. "Of course," I said, finally. He exhaled almost imperceptibly. Relief. He thinks I don't know, I realized. He thinks I'm still the sister who signs things because he says it's fine, the one who assumes good intentions and fills in the blanks herself. He filled the rest of the call with details I hadn't asked for, numbers, words like leverage, temporary, and streamlined, all of it tidy. I didn't interrupt, and for the first time, the quiet between us didn't feel like submission. It felt like information. My brother has always been good at walking into a room like it already belongs to him, even when we were kids. Teachers loved him, coaches trusted him. Parents of other children would tilt their heads and say, "You're so lucky to have a big brother like that." I used to nod along. It felt easier than explaining the parts they couldn't see. He wasn't loud, that's what made it work. He was attentive, quick to volunteer, quick to clarify things for everyone. If I stumbled over a word, he'd finish the sentence for me. If I hesitated, he'd step in with a version that sounded smoother. Over time, people started asking him about my plans instead of me. I remember a science fair in middle school. We worked on separate projects, but somehow during the presentation, he ended up describing mine, how I'd come up with the idea, what the results meant. He didn't lie, he just positioned himself inside it. The judges looked at him when they asked questions. I told myself it didn't matter. He was good at framing, that's the word I use now. Back then, I thought it was confidence or leadership, something admirable. But framing is a skill. You decide what people notice. You decide what they don't. When he says he handled something for me, it isn't generosity, it's authorship. He edits the story until it's essential to him. I can see that clearly now. There was one moment, years ago, when I understood exactly how far he'd go to control a narrative. I haven't thought about it in a long time, not because it was dramatic, because it was quiet, and I learned something from it. The lawyer didn't look surprised. That was the first thing I noticed. He adjusted his glasses, turned the monitor slightly toward me, and said my name slowly, first and last. Careful pronunciation, like he wanted to make sure I recognized it. "I just want to confirm," he said, "that you authorized this change." The document on the screen was clean. Digital signatures, dates. My name attached to a restructuring agreement tied to an investment property my brother had been managing. A line of credit was extended. My personal guarantee is listed in precise legal language. It was all technically valid. That's what made it elegant. "He explained it to me," the lawyer continued. "He said you preferred he coordinate the details." Preferred. I felt something settle in my chest. Not panic, not even anger, just alignment, pieces clicking into place. He hadn't forged anything. I had signed a limited authorization months ago, something narrow, temporary. I remember trusting the summary he gave me. I remember not reading every page. This document expanded that authority, quietly, cleanly, within reach of what I had allowed. Legally binding doesn't mean irreversible. "Can you walk me through the timeline?" I asked. The lawyer nodded, scrolling. Transfer dates, credit exposure, risk assessments, all laid out in neutral font. He watched my face the way professionals do when they expect shock. I didn't give him any. By the time he finished, I understood the implication completely. If the investment faltered, the liability would fall toward me first. My credit, my name, my stability cushions his risk. It wasn't reckless, it was calculated. "Is there a way to revise the authorization moving forward?" I asked. He paused, then nodded slowly. "There are options." I smiled, small, controlled. I didn't tell him I had already decided something. He called that evening, confident. He said, "I told you it was handled, like we were discussing dry cleaning." I stood by the window while he spoke, watching a car idle too long at the curb. The sky was turning that flat gray that makes everything look undecided. "I appreciate you taking care of it," I said, and I meant the sentence, just not the way he heard it. He explained a few more details, simplified, rounded off the edges. His voice had that reassuring tone he's perfected over the years, the one that implies competence, protection. I didn't interrupt a single thing, not when he misstated the percentage, not when he implied the risk was shared evenly, not when he said, "You don't need to think about this stuff." Silence isn't confusion, it isn't a submission, it's storage. While he talked, I made a small note in the margin of my planner, a name, a date, a reminder for the morning. He filled the quiet with confidence. I let him keep it, for now. I spent the next week reading, not scrolling, not reacting, reading. Bank statements, authorization clauses, email threads I'd archived without thinking. I made tea and sat at the dining table like I was studying for an exam I hadn't realized I'd enrolled in. The pattern wasn't dramatic. That was the interesting part. Small extensions, temporary guarantees, my signature attached to bridge gaps he described as short-term adjustments. Each one is reasonable on its own. Together, they formed scaffolding. His scaffolding. The property loan was under his company, but the line of credit leaned on my personal standing, my income history, my debt-to-income ratio, my predictability. He had structured everything so that his growth looked independent, while my stability quietly absorbed the weight. I pulled my credit report, highlighted dates, cross-referenced them with his investment milestones. The timeline aligned too neatly to be accidental. He wasn't gambling, he was leveraging, and leverage depends on something solid underneath it. Me. What surprised me most wasn't the risk, it was the dependency. Without my authorization remaining open, several renewals wouldn't pass underwriting. Without my guarantee, interest terms would shift. Without my name, the expansion would stall. He had built confidence outward, but inward, structurally, he was leaning. I didn't feel angry as I traced the connections. I felt informed. Exposure isn't loud, it's mathematical, and mathematics can be adjusted. I closed the laptop and wrote one email. Short, professional, requesting documentation revisions effective immediately. I didn't copy him. Not yet. Dinner was at my parents' house. Same table, same chipped serving bowl my mother refuses to replace. He arrived late, carrying wine like a peace offering no one had asked for. "Big week," he said, kissing our mother's cheek. "Things are finally scaling." Scaling. I watched him move around the room, shoulders relaxed, voice warm, answering questions before they fully formed. My father nodded at every sentence. My aunt asked for advice about refinancing. He delivered it smoothly, as he'd rehearsed. No one asked me anything. Not about the property, not about the paperwork, not about my name quietly underwriting half his ambition. I passed the bread, smiled when appropriate, let conversations float past me like I wasn't anchored to them. At one point he caught my eye, that quick flicker, checking, measuring whether I looked uncertain, whether I seemed confused. I held his gaze a second longer than usual. Neutral, almost soft. He looked away first. He told a story about a strategic partnership, about calculated risk, about how sometimes you have to trust the right people. The room hummed with approval. What they saw was confidence, expansion, momentum. What I saw was timing. He wasn't reckless, he was careful. Every sentence positioned him as stable, upward, indispensable. I chewed slowly and listened. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to him, I was observing the architecture. 3 days later, I returned his call. "Hey," I said, even, polite, almost casual. He sounded relieved, like he'd been bracing for something dramatic. "Finally had time to review everything?" "Yes," I said, and I wanted to clarify a few points about the authorizations, just standard procedure. He hesitated, a subtle shift. "Oh, sure, of course, whatever you need." I walked around the apartment while I spoke, picking up the mail, lining up bills. My movements were mundane, my words measured. We went over details I hadn't mentioned before, limits, expiration dates, wording that would protect me legally. He accepted every correction without argument, without even asking why I hadn't noticed before. "Thanks," he said, at the end, like I'd done him a favor. I didn't tell him I wasn't thanking him at all. I simply noted the dates, the confirmations, and the changes in my planner, checked them twice. When I hung up, everything shifted quietly, not visibly, not with a dramatic confrontation, just structure, legal, procedural, irreversible or in the right order, and I let it sit, knowing timing was my ally. He still thought he had control. He didn't know I had already begun the slow pivot that would make him dependent on my silence. It happened on a Thursday morning. I logged in to check the accounts, sipping coffee like any other day. There was a notice, a hold, pending review. My name had triggered the freeze. Not dramatic, not sudden, just a simple, precise legal barrier. Funds were inaccessible until permissions were verified. I knew immediately which accounts, the ones he had counted on me to authorize, the ones that had let him operate as if he were untouchable. I watched the balances, static, frozen, no alarms, no alerts beyond the official message. He would call eventually, frantic or trying to sound calm, but right now, in this quiet apartment, I felt nothing. No gloating, no satisfaction, just the stillness of consequence settling into place. I drafted a short email to the bank, clear, professional, confirming the updated permissions I had already arranged. No mistakes, no notion. By lunchtime, everything aligned. Accounts separated, responsibilities shifted. His reliance on me, the scaffolding I'd traced, was now visible in cold numbers. The room stayed quiet, the coffee cooled. I didn't check my phone. I didn't call him. I let the silence communicate what words never could. He was exposed, legally, structurally, completely, and I was steady. Not triumphant, just present. He showed up at my office the next week. I didn't mean it for it to go this far, he said, voice carefully casual. I leaned back in my chair, arms folded. The light through the blinds cut lines across his face. I could see the worry, tight around his jaw, fear, not guilt. Of course, I said, neutral, polite. He shuffled papers in his hands, glanced at my computer screen, then back at me. I thought I was helping, streamlining things for you. I nodded slowly, let the words settle. He needed acknowledgement. I didn't give him absolution. He waited, searching for relief in my eyes. I didn't offer it him. He added, I can fix it if you want. I let that hang between us. The room was still, my heartbeat quiet. I didn't speak about trust, didn't speak about responsibility, didn't speak about past patterns, because the correction had already been made. The leverage, the legal clarity, the quiet reversal, it existed independent of his words. He apologized without meaning it. I accepted it without meaning it mattered. And in that moment, I understood. His fear was real, my compassion deliberate, and the balance of power had quietly shifted. I sit at my desk some evenings, the apartment quiet except for the hum of the heater. I think about him sometimes, not with anger, not with longing, just observation. His betrayal was precise, lawful, almost invisible, but it forced me to notice my own patterns, the ways I deferred, the ways I assumed approval before action. I rebuilt, step by step, permissions revised, accounts separated, boundaries clarified. Not loudly, not dramatically, just thoroughly. And now, when I see him, I don't feel indebted. I don't feel diminished. I feel independent. I thank him quietly, in the way you thank someone who handed you a gift you didn't know you needed, a lesson disguised as disruption. I don't tell him. I don't need to. I've carried myself through it all without spectacle, and for the first time the calm in my own authority feels complete. I can remember the fear and the small betrayals without them touching me, because I built something stronger than fear, something entirely my own. I've never told him I knew from the start, not a word, not a glance, not a hint. Sometimes I imagine him thinking he still has the upper hand, and I let him. It's easier that way. Silence has become my boundary, my choice, my quiet authority. And in that private space, I notice small things, a shadow on the wall, the way light falls on the papers, the calm in my own hands. I didn't expect anyone to stay this long, not even myself.